The Hitler Paradox. Imagine going back to Germany in the 1920s with one mission: to kill Adolf Hitler before he ever rises to power. The goal is simple: eliminate him early, and in doing so, prevent World War II and the immense suffering it caused. So a time traveler sets their machine, steps into the past, and successfully tracks down Hitler before he becomes a figure of historical importance. They succeed, but then a problem arises. If Hitler never comes to power, then World War II never takes place. And if World War II never occurs, there's no reason for anyone in the future to build a time machine or go back in time to kill him. This creates a paradox. By removing Hitler from history, the events that inspired someone to go back and stop him also disappear. Without World War II, the motivation to invent time travel and stop it is erased. As a result, no one enters the time machine in the first place. If no one travels back in time, then Hitler is never assassinated. If Hitler lives, history proceeds as it originally did. World War II happens, and once again, someone is motivated to travel back in time and prevent it. The cycle continues endlessly, forming an impossible loop. This is the core of the Hitler paradox, also known as the killing Hitler paradox. It exposes the contradictions that arise when someone tries to change the past in a way that erases the very reason for taking that action in the first place. Time travel stories often rely on a simple rule: cause and effect. A person acts, and that action shapes the future. But this paradox flips that rule on its head. The act of changing the past removes the cause for the change itself. If the future is altered by the time traveler's action, then the action becomes unnecessary and logically impossible. Consider a slightly different version of this story. In the year 2050, a scientist invents a time machine after decades of research, funded by governments desperate to fix the mistakes of history. Their first mission: stop Hitler. The scientist gathers information about Hitler's early life, pinpoints where he lived, and calculates the exact moment in time when intervention would be most effective. They step into the machine and arrive in 1923, just before Hitler's failed beer hall putsch. The mission is successful. The scientist assassinates Hitler, preventing him from ever rising to power. Back in 2050, the world is changed. There was no World War II, no Holocaust, and the entire trajectory of the 20th century unfolds differently. But now, the world the scientist came from, the world where Hitler existed, where his crimes inspired the invention of time travel, no longer exists. Without Hitler, without the Nazis, without global war, there was never a compelling reason to create a time machine in the first place. The scientist's motivation vanishes along with the history they sought to change. If the scientists never had a reason to go back in time, then they never made the trip, and Hitler was never assassinated. History returns to its original course. Hitler rises to power. World War II happens, and the cycle begins again. One possible solution to this paradox is the idea that history is self-correcting. In this view, even if someone manages to alter a major historical event, the timeline finds a way to restore itself. Perhaps the time traveler succeeds in killing Hitler, but another figure steps in to fill the vacuum, leading Germany into war regardless. Maybe the war happens anyway, with different leaders and slightly different circumstances. The result: global conflict, devastation, and massive loss of life still occurs, just in another form. This interpretation suggests that no matter how much one tries to change the past, history bends back toward the same general path. Another explanation involves parallel universes. Instead of creating a paradox, killing Hitler simply creates a new timeline, one where he never existed. But the original timeline, where Hitler rose to power and World War II happened, continues to exist separately. In this interpretation, the time traveler doesn't erase their reason for traveling back. They just shift into a different version of history. However, this doesn't solve the paradox. It only avoids it by changing the rules of time travel. Rather than dealing with one continuous timeline, this theory assumes every change creates a new branch, a parallel reality. A different theory suggests that history is immutable, fixed, and unchangeable. No matter what a time traveler does, they can't actually alter the past in any meaningful way. If someone tries to kill Hitler, something always stops them. Maybe their gun jams. Maybe they're arrested before completing the mission. Or perhaps, in a twist of fate, they accidentally influence Hitler to be more cautious, ultimately strengthening his rise to power. This aligns with the Navikov's self-consistency principle, which argues that if time travel is possible, then the timeline must remain logically consistent. Any attempts to alter the past simply become part of the past itself. A time traveler might believe they're changing history, but in reality, they're fulfilling it. Their actions were always part of the story. Perhaps it's the time traveler's presence that pushes Hitler down the path to dictatorship. Maybe if they had never gone back, someone else would have come to power, someone less extreme. In trying to change the past, the traveler actually ensures it unfolds the way it always did. This paradox also raises a deeper question. What does it mean to change history? Killing Hitler seems like a clear intervention. But history is not a single thread. It's a vast, interconnected web of causes and effects. Removing one man doesn't necessarily undo the conditions that allowed him to rise. If the political, social, and economic tensions of post-World War I Germany still exist, then another extremist might take his place. Germany might still descend into war. Perhaps an entirely new conflict arises, one even worse than the original. If the past is malleable, the paradox tells us that altering it could erase the motive for doing so. If the past is fixed, then time travel cannot truly change anything. And if parallel universes are real, then the past isn't rewritten, just branched. Each explanation introduces new complexities. The Hitler paradox forces us to ask whether time is something we can control, or whether it follows its own rules, rules that make contradictions like this impossible. Ontological Paradox. The book is worn, and the page is yellowed. He studies it, amazed by its ideas. Over the years, he memorizes every word. Eventually, he decides to rewrite the book by hand, copying it exactly as he found it. When he finishes, he travels back in time and leaves the book in the past for someone else to discover. That person then publishes the book, making it available to future generations. Eventually, the book reaches the same man, the one who originally found it. He studies it again, just as before. The cycle repeats. The book has no actual origin. No one ever truly wrote it. It merely exists, trapped in a loop. This is the ontological paradox. It describes people, knowledge, or objects appearing in time without a definable point of creation. Something enters a time loop, existing indefinitely. It has no past, no initial moment of being created or discovered. It simply exists. One well-known example is the story of a man who receives blueprints for a time machine. He follows the plans and builds the machine. Once it's completed, He goes back in time and hands the blueprints to his younger self. That younger version follows the same instructions, builds the same machine, and passes the blueprints back again. The plans have no original creator. They exist because they always have. Another example involves a musician. One day, she hears a beautiful melody played by an older performer. Inspired, she memorizes it and plays it herself years later. A young musician then hears her performance and eventually plays it for someone else. The cycle continues. The song has no composer. No one ever wrote it down. It has always existed, looping through time. The ontological paradox challenges our belief that everything must have a beginning. It suggests that some things simply are. This concept shows up frequently in time travel stories. In some versions, characters try to break the loop. A scientist might ask, who originally wrote these equations? A traveler might wonder, where did this idea first come from? But no answers emerge. The loop persists. This paradox often overlaps with the bootstrap paradox. The two are related. The bootstrap paradox asks how something can come from nothing. The ontological paradox questions how something can exist without a starting point. In both cases, time travel creates a loop in which cause and effect blur. Consider a man who travels to the future and finds a painting celebrated as a masterpiece. He carefully studies every detail and memorizes the brushstrokes. When he returns to his own time, he recreates the painting exactly. His version becomes the original. It is displayed in a museum and eventually inspires the future version he saw. The painting has no original artist. It exists because it always has. In some stories, people are trapped inside their own loops. A writer discovers a manuscript detailing his life story, including events he hasn't yet experienced. He follows the book's guidance, thinking his actions are his own. Eventually, he reaches the final page and realizes he must now rewrite the manuscript exactly, so his younger self can one day find it. He does. The cycle goes on. This paradox raises difficult questions about free will, time, and knowledge. If information exists within a loop, does it have an author? If a person writes a book only because they found it earlier, did they actually create its contents? The loop removes the beginning. It eliminates the origin. The story of a scientist discovering an invention that always existed fits the same model. A young engineer finds an advanced machine stored in a forgotten room. The design is brilliant, far ahead of its time. They reverse engineer it, improve it, and create blueprints. Years later, they build a working prototype. It gains recognition. Decades pass. The same machine ends up in storage, ready for discovery. The engineer never questions where it came from. The loop completes itself. Sometimes the paradox involves people instead of knowledge or objects. A man meets a stranger who helps him through a crisis. Years later, he accesses a time machine and remembers the stranger's help. He goes back in time and becomes the same stranger he once met. His actions ensure the event happens exactly as remembered. The loop continues. Fiction often uses a common variation. A character receives an item from the future, a watch or weapon, perhaps. They keep it, carry it for years, then travel back in time and leave it in the past. Eventually, the item finds its way to the character again. It has no creator. It simply exists. This paradox leads to deeper questions about reality. If people, knowledge, or objects can exist in time without an origin, does it change how we understand what's real? If something has always existed in a loop, is it truly real? If a person exists only because they went back and caused their own birth, are they self-created? Some argue that the paradox violates logic. Everything must have a source. If it exists, it must have been made. But the ontological paradox suggests otherwise. It challenges the belief that events must follow a clear timeline. For example, a man finds a strange device that allows him to send messages to the past. He tests it by sending instructions on where to find the device. When he gets the message, he follows the directions and finds it. He repeats the process, ensuring that the machine always exists. It has no inventor. It appears in time as though it always has. Science fiction explores the paradox through closed time loops. A scientist wakes with a groundbreaking idea. She writes it down. Years later, she improves the idea and sends it back in time. She remembers receiving it, but never questions the source. The paradox shows us knowledge without discovery. Imagine someone reading a history book describing an event. Later, they travel back in time and become the very person who causes that event. They ensure history happens exactly as written. The book exists because it always has. This concept also challenges our ideas about choice. If a person's existence relies on their own time travel, did they ever have true free will? If a musician plays a song that was never written, is it their song? If an invention appears from nowhere, who owns it? Time travel stories use the ontological paradox to explore loops in cause and effect. The loop prevents change. It locks events into place. In some versions, characters attempt to escape. They question their world and seek answers that never appear. The loop remains. A scientist builds a time machine based on blueprints found in an old notebook. After completing the machine, they travel back in time and leave the notebook for their younger self. That self follows the instructions, builds the machine, and the cycle starts again. The machine has no creator. It simply exists. This paradox suggests that some things may never have a beginning. It forces us to reconsider how we understand time. It raises questions with no clear answers. The loop remains unbroken. Consistency paradox. He is intrigued by history, and one event particularly captures his attention: the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in 1914. He thinks that by stopping the assassination, he could prevent World War I. Driven by this belief, he sets the machine's coordinates and travels back in time. He arrives in Sarajevo on the morning of June 28, 1914. He is fully aware of what is about to take place. Gavrilo Princip, the assassin, is going to shoot and kill the Archduke. If he can intervene, perhaps he can alter history. He takes up position along the motorcade's path, determined to stop Princip before he pulls the trigger. But despite his efforts, something always stops him. He attempts to push Princip away, but someone in the crowd jostles him. He tries to alert the Archduke's guards, but they ignore him. Even when he aims to knock the gun from Princip's hand, unforeseen interference arises. The shot is fired. The event unfolds exactly as it always did. Regardless of how often he tries, he cannot prevent the assassination. It appears the past refuses to be changed. Every step he takes becomes woven into history. Instead of rewriting the event, he becomes part of it. He realizes he was always there. Though not noted in history books, he had been in the crowd all along. His efforts, rather than altering the event, fulfilled its occurrence. This is the consistency paradox. It implies that traveling to the past does not allow one to rewrite history. Every effort to modify events either fails or ends up becoming part of what already happened. The past is fixed, Nothing a time traveler does can contradict it. Some scientists and philosophers propose that if time travel is real, then the universe maintains its timeline. Physics or probabilities might ensure that events unfold as they always did. This idea bypasses paradoxes like the grandfather paradox, in which someone might prevent their own birth. If the past is unchangeable, those paradoxes simply never occur. A woman tests this concept by journeying to the 1960s. Her goal: warn a scientist about an impending catastrophe. She finds the scientist and shares her knowledge, but he dismisses her as delusional. She tries to leave proof, but it gets lost or ignored. Frustrated, she returns to her time. Nothing has changed. Upon deeper inspection, she realizes she had always been part of the timeline. She appears in records as an unidentified woman who made bizarre predictions. Her attempt didn't shift events. It was already part of them. Her travel to the past fulfilled, rather than altered, history. The consistency paradox asserts that a time traveler's actions have already been included in the timeline. They can't create contradictions. What they do has already been done. If someone visits the past to change something, their presence was already a part of those events. Their efforts, success, or failure were always embedded in history. Consider a young man who finds an old physics book. The handwriting inside is his own, yet he doesn't recall writing it. Using the notes, he forms new theories that lead to inventing time travel. He decides to go back and leave the book for his younger self, ensuring he finds it. The book has no origin. It's caught in a loop passed between versions of himself. This is another manifestation of the consistency paradox. Ideas, objects, even people might be in time loops, but they can't be changed or erased. They were always part of the timeline. A man tries to eliminate a key historical document by burning it in the past. When he returns to his present, the document still exists, but it is partially burned. He learns that it was always damaged in history. His attempt didn't destroy it. It caused the damage that was always there. He realizes he was responsible for what he tried to stop. A woman visits 1776 to observe the signing of the Declaration of Independence. She blends in without interfering, but she accidentally drops a modern coin. It rolls across the floor unnoticed. Centuries later, archaeologists find the futuristic coin beneath the signing site. Her visit didn't change anything. It confirmed she had always been there. Some believe the consistency paradox implies free will doesn't exist when time travel is possible. If a person can't alter the past, then all choices were predetermined. They may feel autonomous, but all decisions lead to the same end. A man goes back in time to save someone, only to cause the event he wanted to prevent. Rather than stopping the past, he ensures it happens as written. This paradox is echoed in ancient myths. The story of Oedipus is an example. A prophecy tells Oedipus's father that his son will kill him. He abandons the boy, hoping to stop it. But this act leads the child to be raised by others. Eventually, Oedipus unknowingly fulfills the prophecy. Trying to change the future causes it to come true, like time travelers who become the reason for history unfolding as it did. A scientist builds a device to send messages to the past. He sends a warning about an impending tragedy. Historical records confirm someone received an anonymous prediction. He realizes he had always been the sender. His message didn't change history. It completed it. A group of historians send someone to learn about a lost civilization. Locals mistake the traveler for a god. He becomes part of their mythology. Centuries later, texts describe a figure who matches the traveler. He was always a part of that past. The consistency paradox argues time travel cannot create contradictions. The past is set. Attempts to change it only reinforce its course. A person may believe their choices are their own, but those decisions have already shaped the timeline. Through direct actions or unintended effects, they fulfill a role that's already been recorded. Self-creation paradox. They arrive in the early 1900s, blending into society. Over time, they meet someone, fall in love, and have a child. That child grows up, has a family, and through the generations, their own lineage continues. Eventually, one of their descendants is born in the present day, the same person who originally stepped into the time machine. They have traveled back in time and unknowingly become their own ancestor. There is no clear beginning or end to their existence, just an infinite loop of events where they cause themselves to be born. This paradox creates a problem with causality. Normally, every person comes from a set of parents who come from their own parents, stretching back in a continuous chain. Each person exists because of biological reproduction that follows a clear timeline. But in this case, the origin point disappears. The traveler was born because they went back in time and caused their own birth. This means their existence is self-created. There is no original ancestor, no first person to start the cycle. The entire chain of events loops back on itself, which defies how cause and effect usually work. This paradox is sometimes called the ontological paradox, but the self-creation paradox is a more specific version. It deals with a person instead of an object or idea. It's a problem because it challenges the way time and reality work. Normally, things exist because something caused them to exist. A book is written by an author. A painting is created by an artist. A machine is built by an engineer. But in the case of the self-creation paradox, there is no true creator. The person who exists was never originally born in a normal way. They were only born because they traveled back and caused it to happen. Think of another scenario. A baby is left on the doorstep of an orphanage in the year 1900. The people running the orphanage take the baby in, but they don't know where the child came from. The baby grows up, eventually discovers time travel, and decides to go back in time to investigate their origins. They travel back to the year 1900 and see a familiar scene, a baby being left on the doorstep of an orphanage. They realize they are the one who left the baby there. In other words, they place themselves in history. There was never a moment when the baby was originally born. It was just placed into time by the same person it would later grow into. This idea also appears in fiction. Robert Heinlein's short story, All You Zombies, tells the story of a person who, through a series of time travel events, ends up being both their own mother and father. Every step in the cycle is created by another step in the same cycle. There is no beginning. Each action just loops back to create itself. This highlights the central issue with self-creation. Where did it all begin? If someone exists only because they traveled back in time, then what was their true starting point? Science fiction often explores this paradox because it presents a deep problem for how we understand time. If someone can be their own ancestor, then the normal rules of history no longer apply. It means a person can exist without needing a first cause, but that contradicts how everything else in reality works. If something exists, there must be a reason for it. A planet forms because of gravity pulling material together. A person is born because of biological reproduction. A building stands because it was designed and constructed. But in a self-creation loop, there is no original cause. The person just is. They exist without ever truly being created. One way to look at this paradox is through the idea of a closed time loop. In normal time, events happen in a straight line. One thing causes another, which causes another, and so on. But a closed time loop is different. It doesn't go in a straight line. Instead, it folds back on itself so that events keep repeating with no clear beginning. A self-created person exists in this loop. They are born because they go back in time, and they go back in time because they are born. There is no starting point. It's just a cycle that keeps itself going. Some people argue that this type of paradox could never happen. They believe the laws of nature would prevent it. Others suggest that time travel might work in a way that allows for loops like this, but we don't fully understand how. If time travel ever becomes possible, we may have to rethink how causality works. Could the universe allow a person to create themselves? Or would some unknown rule prevent it? The self-creation paradox also raises questions about identity. If someone goes back and causes their own birth, who are they? Are they a normal human? Or are they something different? Something outside of the usual rules of time? If there is no original version of them, are they real in the same way that other people are? Most people have a clear origin. They are born at a specific time to specific parents. Their past is fixed and known. But a self-created person has no fixed origin. Their past is a loop, not a straight line. This challenges our basic understanding of what it means to be a person. It also creates issues for free will. If a person exists only because they went back in time, do they have any choice in the matter? Could they decide not to go back? Or is the loop unbreakable? If they choose not to travel back, then they were never born, which means they never had the choice in the first place. This raises a troubling question. Is their life truly theirs? Or is it locked into a predetermined path? If their past is already written, does that mean their future is also fixed? This idea connects to other time travel paradoxes, like the predestination paradox, where attempts to change the past always end up preserving it. Another problem with the self-creation paradox is the issue of genetic material. In normal reproduction, two parents contribute DNA to create a new person. But in a self-creation loop, where does the genetic material come from? If the traveler is their own ancestor, then their DNA must come from themselves. But that creates an endless cycle with no original source. In real biology, DNA mutates over time, and new traits appear through mixing genetic material from different people. A person who is their own ancestor would have no genetic diversity. In reality, this would likely cause problems over generations as mutations and errors accumulate without new genetic material being introduced. The paradox becomes even more complex when considering changes to history. If someone is their own ancestor, then history must remain stable to ensure they exist. But what happens if an outside force interferes? What if someone else time travels and disrupts the cycle? Would that erase them from existence? If so, then their entire timeline is fragile, dependent on every event happening exactly as before. But if their timeline is flexible, then that suggests they could change their own history, raising even more questions about causality. The self-creation paradox highlights one of the biggest problems with time travel. It breaks the normal cause and effect relationship that governs the universe. In our everyday experience, things exist because something caused them to exist. The self-creation paradox removes that cause, leaving only an endless loop with no beginning. If time travel ever becomes a reality, we may have to face the possibility that such paradoxes could exist. But for now, they remain thought experiments, questions about what might happen if time were not as simple as we think.